Games are a very powerful medium. I mean, games are an excellent form of learning, both intrinsic and extrinsic learning. And what most people don't think about is that video games or computer games really are an extension of games that are not digital and even sort of primitive play. Right? If you think of animals or even us human beings, as we grow, we play in many ways to learn. It's through that play process that we learn new skills, that we learn how to, be grown-ups or learn how to hunt or whatever the case may be. So the fact that, digital games or video games and computer games have this opportunity to teach and be a stimulating learning environment really is no surprise. Yeah, it's a generational thing. So, and also when video games first came out, they were relatively primitive, right? So if we think of Civilization as really being one of the ideal, learning type games that are fun and not necessarily meant to be learning, but you do learn, that only came about, I don't know when the first one was, maybe 10, 15 years ago. It didn't come out at the same time as Space Invaders came out. Right? I mean, Space Invaders, Pac-Man, these were very simple games. And so, what were you learning in those games? Well, maybe it was more intrinsic, like problem solving, trial and error, these kinds of things, spatial awareness. So part of it was an evolution of the technology and the medium itself, but also an evolution of, as designers, our own abilities and craft to design games that were engaging and more so engaging. And we didn't know how to do that right at the beginning of the industry or of the medium. And same thing with other forms of art and entertainment that do also have learning capacities. You weren't doing that from the first example. So part of it was an evolution of the technology. Part of it was an evolution of the skills of the creators. But then also part of it was this kind of adoption from a generational point of view, that early games perhaps were more so geared towards children, and adults or educators didn't necessarily see the potential and saw it more as sort of a waste of time away from studies. And now you have people who grew up playing games and understand the engaging nature of games and the power, and they're educators. And like, well, geez, why don't I sort of, I'm an educator, and why don't I merge the two and explore? And so largely it's the academics and educators and designers who grew up playing games that are sort of exploring the potential. You have both kinds of research that are occurring. Um, some research, what I would call game studies, is looking at the kind of socio-psychological, economic impacts of games and game culture, and that is completely fascinating. I mean, this to me parallels what we saw in the film industry, right, where it took some time for the academics to look at films as, well, there's something really interesting here that has an effect on society and our culture. Let's explore that, let's study that. So game studies is extremely exciting and does open up new ways of thinking and looking at games from a consumption and also from a production point of view. I mean, you're right. We certainly have some of the negative research that are looking at some of the like violence, effective violence, and so on. I'm always curious about those things, but I find that research comes from a very biased perspective, where it's the researcher is already assuming that games are bad, and now I'm going to make the research to prove that it's true, as opposed to being more sort of unbiased and let me explore and see which side it comes on. So, I mean, particularly in the United States, the negative research is really coming from that sort of perspective, where the researcher is really biased and they're trying to validate their assumptions. It's not very, I would say, valid type of academic research, unfortunately. So. Yeah, I mean, this is not a new phenomena. This kind of the fear of the fear of the new generation's pop culture by the older generation. I mean, you're right. Whether it was jazz or Elvis or comic books or television, I mean, it's a pretty common pattern from a cultural point of view. Yeah, a lot of people don't particularly like the label serious games, but no one's come up with a better one. And so it's an easy kind of label to use. So serious games, in the way it's meant to be used, is for games that are not purely about entertainment. There is some kind of ulterior or additional purpose, whether that's advertising or learning or even propaganda. Really depends on the goal. So it's not just, hey, I'm making these robots and dinosaurs and it's just for fun. It's, I'm making these dinosaurs and it's meant to represent the oppressive government, and then I'm embedding it with some kind of message and meaning or learning opportunity. Then we're talking about a quote unquote serious game. The purpose of the game was to serve as a recruiting tool for the American Army, right? And so they used a game as a fun and engaging environment, and also as a means to teach tactics and doctrine and all this kind of stuff. And yes, it was a fun game to play. It was a very advanced first-person shooter. It was a fun, well-designed game. But it's a serious game in the sense that it was for this other purpose. It wasn't just about making a fun game. It had all these other sort of agendas attached to it. So in that sense, although it looks like any other shoot-'em-up game that the mainstream industry would produce, it would be classified as more so as a serious game. Well, so in many ways, that's the more interesting one, where if we've mentioned Civilization or Age of Empires, a lot of the historical games, by playing them and conquering the land and so on, you're really learning a lot about history and civilization and military type technology and so on. I mean, and you're learning that in sort of a not a direct way, right? I'm learning it because I want to learn it, because I want to win the land, I want to win the territory, win the fight. And so I'm kind of motivated to learn because it's part of the play experience. And then, there are many other games along those lines, or also I think of something like Little Big Planet, which the learning is more so a creative process, right? Little Big Planet, you're given the tools to create additional levels and worlds and puzzles for your friends to play through. And so while it's not sort of textbook style learning where I'm learning a history lesson, I'm learning to be creative. I'm learning how to use these digital tools to create digital content, and so that kind of learning is fun too. And the end result is also a very fun experience. And so, there's a lot of examples of this kind of learning that's done within, fun games, not serious games. And I would even say that you learn something from every game, even just the fun ones, right? So there's, as I mentioned briefly before, this idea of intrinsic learning, that even the ones that are completely void of any kind of historical or whatever type learning, I'm still learning stuff like trial and error, problem solving, taking risks, exploring different options, resource management, all of these kinds of very kind of intangible or intrinsic skills. I'm learning when I'm playing these games that are quote unquote just fun.